in Corinthians, and this is important, we have dealt with Jesus is the foundation. I think I spent 3, maybe 4 weeks on that. So that's a long time to spend on a few little verses, but it's essential. It's probably the essential text in all of Corinthians. If you can say that one part is well, you can't say that one part is more important than another. However, having said that, you've got to get that. You've got to get what I talked about over the last few weeks if you want to understand life, if you want to understand how God has made things, that God has engineered all of reality in such a way that the Christ message is inevitable. It is inevitable that you will be living it out whether you want to or not, but you will either be living it out on the way up to God or you'll be living it out in the upside down world. So you can't escape it. You can't escape the Christian message. You can't escape it. So some of you are shaking your heads wondering, what am I talking about? I have to go back through the last 3 weeks of the messages so that you can reconnect with what I've talked about. This is what happens when you have guest speakers like Rocky. You come in and change the direction. It wasn't really changing of a direction, but it was wasn't on my Corinthians, and so but he did very well, spoke very well. Janet, you had something. Now, can you say it in like 2 minutes? If you can't, then we don't have time. But if you can, then we do. Time's ticking away.
Look, sorry. I can relax, I'll be quicker. Okay, now, you may remember that Rocky was reminding us, be faithful over little things, and God will make us ruler over more. In fact, the reason I've got my Bible is that last night and now even this one, I was looking up the story of the talents and how Jesus commended the servant who'd increased his 1 talent, and then he said, oh, you've been faithful over a little, I'll make you ruler over 10 cities. I was just looking at it this morning. Blah, blah, blah. You can read it for yourselves. However, I had a lovely example on Sunday afternoon. That's last Sunday morning he preached on that. Sunday afternoon, I had a lovely incident that illustrated the truth of what he'd been telling us. As we're faithful over little things, God will give us bigger things. And sometimes they're just bigger things. They're not giant big things, but he also gives us those things as we're faithful over little things. However, what happened? Peter, my husband, is very conscientious about putting our bins out. But last Sunday afternoon he'd forgotten. And I'm thinking to myself, no, I knew he would, remember, probably put them out the next morning. But I'm thinking, no, I'm just going to let him do his job. How you let all these thoughts go. My attitude, wasn't the best. And I'm thinking, no, it's his job. I'm not going to put them, blah, blah, blah. Late afternoon. Anyhow, I'm trying not to be too long, sorry. Now look, anyhow, so I thought, no, I'll bless Peter, but it'll be a blessing to him. One thing less he has to think of. So I go out, I put the bins out, 2 bins, they're due to be picked up the next day. Anyhow, I'm just filling around, and I could hear our next door neighbour on the right side is the father of, he's looking after the house while his son's in Canada on holidays, and so we're just getting to know him a bit. You don't know him that well, nice guy. Anyhow, I could hear he was mowing the lawn in his front yard. But oh yeah, that's good. Anyhow, I'm coming back from putting out the bin, etc. And he comes out, puts his bin out, and then he would you like me to mow your front lawn?
Well,
Now, the lawn was pretty good because we have home assist, and Peter does a really good job, particularly on the back lawns, and, home assist. Yeah, it didn't look too bad, but anyhow, isn't that lovely? He came in and he mowed our front lawn, and I love it when our front lawn is really, particularly, it's a nice yard. It's a nice yard. We have a lovely backyard, and
thanks.
big one,
Thanks,
and
Janet.
a lovely front. But wait, there's more. Just one
There's
more
more.
thing. Is that the whole thing about this too is that we like to connect. With people in our street, and it's a contact. It's a means of, building up a bit more of a relationship with this guy. But wasn't that lovely? Get the point, don't you? Don't have over little things, and God will make you ruler over more, or He'll give you more. Thank you.
No, Janet, that was absolutely perfect. Oh. Hold on, here we go. This is the defense. This is Peter's defense coming up now. Yeah, well, what I enjoyed was how Janet confessed that her attitude wasn't very good, and you didn't need to say that. All right. So the last thing that I said last time that I spoke was that that it says in Corinthians chapter 3 that if you destroy God's temple, then God will destroy you. So if you destroy sacred things, then you are committing yourself to self-destruction. You are committing self-destruction. And just keep that in mind as I read to you 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18 to 20. Do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you thinks he is wise, by the standards of this age, he should become a fool, so that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. As it is written, He catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows that the thoughts of the wise are futile. Futile thoughts. Be careful. He knows what you're thinking. Yes. Vain thoughts. You got to watch the thought police with their futile thoughts. So the first thing that Paul talks about here is self-deception. Do not deceive yourselves. The beginnings of self-destruction. We've all seen people that self-destruct. Let me take you back. Don't destroy sacred things, otherwise you'll be destroyed. That's talking about self-destruction. Okay? So self-destruction begins with self-deception. Now, we've all seen people who are self-destructive. We've seen lives that become successful and then suddenly fall apart. We've seen marriages where everything is going so well, and then the man just gets stupid one day, throws it all away to satisfy some itch that he has. People that find themselves having a sudden access to celebrity or to money, who then find that they have an addiction that they could never have afforded had they not received all the money. And so there are people around that constantly remind us that we can easily self-destruct, that we're often our biggest problems. My biggest problem is not the devil. My biggest problem is me. It is what is going on within me. So do not deceive yourselves. I remember that movie, A Star is Born, how somebody had made it to the top, and then because they were reaching the end of their time, they didn't understand that there is a time and a season. Turn, you know, that we have our times of rising, and then there are times where we have to pass on the baton to another, and so if we don't realize that, they make movies about us called A Star is Born. Yeah. Self-destruction begins with self-deception. Self-deception. So there's not knowing. Nobody can blame you if you didn't know. Nobody can blame Peter because he hadn't thought about taking the bins out. You can't be blamed if you don't know. But then that's not where it ends, because there's not just ignorance. There then comes not wanting to know. And you all know what not wanting to know is. Don't tell me. I'm better off if I don't know. You know, I don't want to be worried or concerned about that kind of thing, so don't tell me. Not wanting to know is when you are out on a date and you see a little sign in this person that he's a bit controlling, that he's a bit aggressive, but you don't want to know about that. You just don't want to know. Don't tell me about that. Somebody tries to tell you about him, but you don't want to know because you're so caught up in the thrill of the romance. Yes. And so you don't want to know. So there's not knowing, there's not wanting to know, and then there is willful ignorance. Willful ignorance. Willful blindness. When you lie knowingly. When you knowingly tell a lie. And that's when you get caught with your pants down and you double down on your stance because you don't want to admit that you've been embroiled in a lie. I was thinking this week, what would it take for me to lie to myself? What would it take for you to lie to yourself? Well, it turns out not much. All you got to do is appeal with a big enough appeal to some need that we have, some need that is in us. So fear, for example, if you were to stand over me with a threatening, fearful thing, look, sorry to keep on going back to this, but it is so much, it is so close to all of us that you can just see the connection straight away. Look at what happened when COVID and the great pandemic struck, and how everybody was being persuaded by fear to do things that they regularly would have been opposed to. They became irregular out of fear. So there's fear. There is pleasure. If you offer me enough pleasure, what would I be willing to lie about regarding myself if you offered me enough money, enough alcohol, enough drugs, enough whatever? What would it take to appeal? Remember, Eve had everything that she could possibly desire going for her. And when confronted with the opportunity to desire some pleasure, some greater knowledge, some higher level of existence, when offered that, it turns out it didn't take too much. It didn't take much. She had everything. She had everything going for her. She had it all. She had it all. Adam had it all. Didn't take much at all. All it took with his wife saying, "Here." And that was all that it took for Adam. It doesn't take much at all for us to lie to ourselves. Yes. Now the whole point is control. It's all about control. The lie is all about trying to gain control of us, of the way that we think, of the way that we think and the way that we talk, of the way that we live out our lives, and the way that we speak about certain things. There is an attempt to try to control the way that you think in life. George Orwell, he had an unpublished preface to one of his books. It was either Animal Farm or 1984. But in that preface, he said there that the thing that is used by those in power, the thing that is primarily used by those in power, and the thing that you have to be fearful of more than anything else, is not so much that two men in black suits are going to turn up at your front door and cart you off to prison. He says that's not the thing that is used today to try to keep people controlled. He said the thing that is used is information. That if they can set up a prison within your mind, a prison within your mind, then without them looking as though they are being bullies or coercive at all, they have already got you doing what they want you to do, speaking the way that they want you to speak. The culture war is primarily about the definition of words. And so they use words today that most of us don't even know. Some of us would find difficult to pronounce. They use words like heteronormativity and toxic masculinity and cisgender and non-binary, and most of us don't have a clue what these words even mean. But if you speak in a certain way, then you'll be accused. Can't even agree on what constitutes a woman anymore. And if you don't agree, then you will be accused. If you don't go along with what they say, they'll cancel you. Remember when Pilate was talking to Jesus and he said, "Listen, Jesus, don't you know that I'm the one in power here, and I can make things good for you, or I can make things bad. If you just talk in the way I'd like you to speak, if you can just say the right words, just say things how they be a little political here. Just be a little bit political here, and I can get you off, you know. Just say the right thing and I can get you off, because it's all about trying to control the way that you speak. At one time, harm meant that you got punched in the face. But nowadays they'll accuse you of harm if you use trigger words. If you say something that traditional values would hold on to. If you say what the my Bible, if you say what is written in my Bible about homosexuality, then you are causing harm. You are dangerous. It constitutes as violence. And just for saying what I've said just then, I could be taken to prison in Australia. So we recently had a referendum. And in the referendum was for something that the majority of Australians didn't want. And we found out pretty quickly that the majority of Australians didn't want what the referendum was about. Don't ask me the way I voted, it's none of your business. But the majority of Australia didn't want what the referendum was about, and yet a few minority elites kept on pressing the agenda to the point where we spent $400 million to find out what we already knew. And then they blamed that upon the negative campaign of the no side. And so what they're going to be pushing through now, through Parliament, is a misinformation bill to limit what can be said out there in media, so that only one message gets through. Why is that? Because they're after control. They're after control. And it turns out that this kind of thing isn't just happening here in Australia, but it's happening all over the world, all over the Western world. Doesn't matter where you go in the Western world, it's there. This same agenda is being pushed through all over the world. That lets you know there's a principality, an invisible thing. You can't see it because it's invisible. But you know it is there. It's the devil! It's the devil! And then Paul talks about, so don't deceive yourselves. Don't buy into it. There's ignorance, then there's willful ignorance. Don't buy into it, because they're just trying to control. And then Paul talks about the standards of this age. What are the standards of this age? Well, it's whatever the propagandists are trying to convince you that you have to speak in line with. Consider what today's culture encourages you to embrace and what it applauds, and consider who it belittles. So, if you think about it, climate change, way up there on the agenda. Now, listen, I don't like the fact that we have just about decimated the oceans. But when you're a climate extremist and a climate activist, so that everybody has to conform to your agenda, then they're trying to control you. Celebrity is high on the agenda today. If you're a celebrity, you don't have to be smart at all. You don't have to know much at all, but if you're a celebrity, everybody wants to listen to what you've got to say. You can get away with just about anything as long as you're famous enough. Then, of course, materialism has always been there. Today we've got the race card that is being used continually, trying to make you feel as though you're a racist if you don't agree with what a certain elite group of people are saying you have to believe. Scientism, although that's fading, but that science is the answer, that's fading, by the way. But that's still popular. Yeah. So, Paul said, if any think they are wise, he should become a fool. So, if any of you think that you are up with the social agenda, if any of you think that you are up with what the world's culture thinks is the way that you should go, then you should become a fool in their eyes. In other words, he's telling us that you need to have courage. That's what he's saying here. You have got to have courage to stand up and stand on your own 2 feet and stand for something that has so much value in it that people who are trying to control the message cannot control what is going on within you. If there is anything I think that I'm against, it is the way that people try to control one another. People try to control what is going on, to control what is going on even in church, to be in control as though we're all some kind of puppets, and you've got one or two who are the puppeteers, and everybody's like marionettes, you know. Everybody say amen. Amen. It's the control. If any of you think they are wise, he should become a fool. In the beginning, nobody became a Christian without courage. In the beginning, becoming a Christian cost you something. When we look at someone who's done something brave and courageous, we admire them, don't we? They don't even need to be a Christian. But if they've done something brave and courageous, we admire them. Why is that? Well, the reason why we admire them is that's how God has made us to be. We're attracted to that. We're drawn to that because God has made us all so that we would be brave and courageous. We look at them and we think, what makes them different? What makes them different to me? Why aren't I like that? Why don't I have what they've got? And it turns out they don't have anything that I don't got. That everything that a brave person has is in me. When they were approaching the situation where they had to jump into a raging river to save a person, they had the flight and fight mechanism triggered within them. They just chose to ignore the flight and chose the fight. When it was needed for them to run into a house to save a baby, they had the feeling this could hurt going on within them. But they chose to run in anyway. Over 30 years ago now, there was a television reenactment of something that took place in America, and there was a truck driving down the road, and he was involved in an accident and skidded off the road and ended up in a gutter. And the truck had been squashed in. The impact was so great that the truck had been squashed in, and the driver was trapped inside the truck that looked like an accordion. The damage was that great on this truck, and it was in a remote part of the country. They didn't have access to oxyacetylene torches and things like that. All they had was a couple of tow trucks, and the police were there, and the traffic was mounting up, and there was a black man, who came onto the scene. His name was Jennings. And when Jennings came upon the scene, he looked at the commotion and wondered what was taking place, and he started walking up, and as he was walking up, a fire broke out in the cabin. And when the fire broke out in the cabin, the police just pushed everybody away. They tried to get the truck back up onto the road, and they tried to get the man out of the truck, but he was jammed in. The door was compressed in there. They even tried to get a tow truck to pull it away, and it couldn't do anything to it. And when Jennings came up and saw that this man was in trouble and that a fire was raging inside the cabin, he pushed past the crowd. The police tried to stop him, but he pushed past the police and ran to the cabin of this truck. And when he got there, he wedged himself up against the truck. He was a big man, about 6 foot tall, 160 pounds or so. A big, solid, black man. And when he braced himself up against this truck, he took a hold of that door, and with all his might, he pulled so hard that he ripped the shirt open on his back. And he pulled so hard, and the door came off of the cabin. And then he got inside the cabin, and he was trying to tap out the fire on this man that was all over this man, trying to tap it out. His hands were moving so fast that he wasn't being burned, and he tried to pull him out, but the man's leg was broken, and it was wrapped around the brake, and he couldn't budge him. And so he reached down and grabbed the brake pedal in front of hundreds of people by now. He reached down and grabbed the brake pedal and ripped it out of the floor, lifted the man out, took him out, and while the paramedics were looking after the man, Jennings walked quietly back to his car. And the people in the crowd said to him, "Why did you do that? How did you do that?" And Jennings turned around and said to them, "I don't like fire." Now it sounds kind of funny until you realize that 10 days before, Jennings had driven home from work and into his driveway right at the moment when in his home, where his wife and his son were, the natural gas that was feeding his home exploded and set on fire the whole house. Jennings got out of his car and ran into his house to try to find and save his wife and child. But the heat was so strong that it drove him out. He shook himself and went back in, and when he went back in, the roof caved in on top of him, and he ran back out, and he fell on the ground and, with bawling his eyes out, watched his wife and his son die in the fire just 10 days previously. And he made a determination that he would never allow fire to get in his way again. Yeah. So, what courage is, really, is something that's just a decision away. Just a decision away. In fact, you can make the decision to act courageously so fast that it is as though you haven't thought about it at all, but the process is. When I was 18 years of age, I was on a youth camp, and we'd erected up in the Adelaide Hills, we'd erected a flying fox that went across a valley, and it was a very long flying fox. It was a great ride. It was very exciting, yes. And the valley was 200 feet below. And there was a young boy who wanted to go on the flying fox, but he was just, just a young lad, but he wanted to go. And so they asked me if I'd be happy to take him over with me. And so they lifted him up, and he held on to the handles of the flying fox, and off we went. And this was fast. Flying through the air. The little boy was screaming. He was so excited. And as we were going through, we were over the deepest part of the valley when the little boy's strength ran out. And he let go. Straight down. I caught him with my feet as he was going straight down. And we took him down to safety. He thought it was great. He just thought it was the greatest time he'd ever had. Didn't realize how close he was to the end. Yeah. I thought about that after, and I thought, man, catching him in your feet, that could have been the end of me, the distraction of it all. But I was a hero that day. What really makes courage possible is not the absence of fear. It's the determination to do something in spite of your fear. To do something in spite of your fear. We've been called to have courage in our lives, to have courage in our lives. This is part of what it means to be a Christian, to have courage in our lives. It is part of what faith does within a person. It gives you courage, as Bill talked about this morning, to fight the good fight of faith. Why would Scripture talk about such a thing? Why would it mention such a thing if it didn't mean that you were going to be in a scrap or two in your life and that you needed the courage to be able to get through? Think about that word, courage. Core age. The age of the core. The age, everybody jumped. The age of the core. So, the word courage, and it's originally a French word, and it's basically cœur. Ha ha ha. Cœur, and it means the center. It means to be centered. So you think about your core. Your core. Your core is the central part of you. That's the part you have to be centered. Courage is a call to be centered. It is a call to be centered. Remember Joshua, who was about to take on Jericho, and the angel came to him, and Joshua was always ready for a fight. Always ready for a fight. And so he stood up and said, "Are you for us or are you against us?" And the angel said, "Neither." Because God is not an extremist. He wants you to be centered. Aggression is not enough to get you through the fights that you're going to have as a Christian. You have to be centered. Two men came to Jesus and said, "Would you make a decision for us about our inheritance? Will you make a decision for us about our inheritance?" Jesus said, "I'm not taking sides." God is wanting you to be centered, wanting you to be centered. When I'm boxing, not that I do much of that anymore. Might do a little wrestling, Sasha and I might have a little wrestling match every now and then, but when I'm boxing, if you just go for my head, you might be lucky. You might be lucky every now and then. You might be lucky. But if you get my core, if you do the body blows, if you do the body blows and keep on hitting my body, you are going to rock my center, my ability to be able to stay strong for the fight, and you can knock me out with a blow to my body because my central equilibrium is knocked off center. These extremists who yell and scream and rant and rage, they do not have courage. They are not centered in their lives. All they have is aggression. That is not what you need as a Christian. You need to be centered. You need to be rock solid. You need to be purposeful. You need to be determined. This is what will take you through life today. This is what you need in our world today. Courage. Yeah. All right. So God said to Joshua in Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 to 9, he said, be strong and courageous. He said that twice in the space of 9 verses. But before he ever said that, he said to Joshua, I will never leave you. And so what that means is that if you have courage, the reason why you have the courage that you have is because God says, I will never leave you. In other words, because I am with you, you don't have to worry about your life, because I'll take care of that. You just worry about doing what I've told you to do, because I'm with you. Romans, got it written down here somewhere. Romans, coming. Chapter 8, verse 32 says, he who did not spare, help me, Jesus. Romans 8:32, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not along with him graciously give us all things? So along with Jesus, you get whatever it is that you need. Along with him will give you all things. When you've got Jesus in your life, you've got everything that you need. So in other words, Jesus is the courage that you never had. When you didn't have courage to take up your cross, Jesus took it up for you. When you didn't have courage to give up that relationship, Jesus gave it up for you. When you didn't have the courage to quit drinking or to stop taking drugs or stop that habit, Jesus bore every lash of the whip and every blow of the hammer. Jesus is the courage that you never had. Woo! 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 Shall I do it again? Will you ever ask me if I need help getting down off the stage again? Okay, I just want to finish this passage. I've got 5 minutes. Hopefully it won't take that long. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 21 to 23. This is the very end of 1 Corinthians 3. Praise the Lord. So then, no more boasting about men. All things are yours. Didn't we just read in Romans that Paul said, along with Jesus, you'll have all things? All things are yours. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, that's Peter, or the world or life or death, or the past or the present or the future, all are yours. And you're of Christ, and Christ is of God. All things are yours. All things are yours. Think about that. There's a famous story that I told many, many years ago, and it gets told around the world, actually. They probably even forgot that I was the one that told it. But when Chantal was a little girl, Chantal's, my oldest daughter, I don't know how old she is now, she wouldn't want you to know. But when Chantal was a little girl, say 5 years old, she was very, very pedantic. Some would say she had OCD even at a young age. But she knew stuff. One day I bought her a bag of jelly beans. There were a lot in there. It was a big bag. And I remember one day that I was doing some work and she'd left the bag of jelly beans in my office so that Monique couldn't get to them. And as I'm working away, every now and then I reach into the bag and I take out a jelly bean. I didn't have too many. I might have had, 4 or 5. But when Chantal got back to her bag of jelly beans, I heard her voice from my office say, "Daddy, Daddy." I said, "Yes, Chantal." She said, "They're not all there. They're not all there." And I'm thinking, when she yelled out that they're not, only Chantal would know that they're not all there, any other child would have, because it was still a full bag of jelly beans. And she knew that I would have been the only one that would have taken any. And so this was the thing that I got out of that a 5-year-old girl knew what all meant. And if a 5-year-old girl knows what all means, and God says to us, all things are yours, then we need have no excuse for living like paupers in the world, for living as though our lives are worthless, for living as though we don't matter, as if God won't look after us. Because God says, all things are yours. And if a 5-year-old little girl knows what all means, then what about you? And what about me? So you remember the parable of the pearl of great price. That's the parable where a man goes and sells everything that he has to get that one thing. What that teaches us is that God will give you anything you want if you're willing to sacrifice everything else for it. And there you have the balance. There you remain centered between having all things and having the thing that you want. Yeah. All right. And that's the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Thank you, Jesus.